Okay guys, so I'm going to quickly go over how to conduct your primary research as well as how to embed this into your report for the assessment task. So, broken down into steps for you. The first really key one is to conduct that primary research and collect your data. So first thing you need to make sure is that you remember is that you need a theory. You can't just go out and start looking for data. You need to go out looking for data with the clear thought or process of what you're trying to find. So the first thing you kind of want to remember is that you do need that theory. So I've got some questions there to help you to find or to figure out that theory, also to find that data. So what is your theory? Remember, we talked about that in relation to what do you think is going to be the outcome. So remember the example when I talked about with Sudanese migrants, is that Sudanese people are connected, not that they are, but Sudanese people are presented as being connected with gangs and crime in the media. So that was the theory that I kind of went through with you in class. That theory can also work for, say, if you're going to do a questionnaire or interview. Then the next thing you want to do is think about how you're going to find this information. So if you're doing content analysis, what news platforms are you going to use? If you are doing questionnaire interviews, focus groups probably can't be done anymore unless you're going to do it over a platform like Skype, although I wouldn't really recommend it. So you might just want to focus on interviews or questionnaire if that's something you want to do. So what types of people will you use? Then the next thing you want to then start to think about is what are you looking for? What kinds of data are you thinking you might find? So when we went through this in class, that was when we were doing the quantitative research method. That was when we were finding types of words. So we discussed about what kind of words might be used if we're looking for that association. So we were thinking about crime, violent, gangs, and so on. If you're going to be using the qualitative research method, so you're not tallying words, you're looking for the whole article, this table is a really good thing for you to use to think about, what am I looking for? So you could probably use a lot of features there, a lot of the questions there. You don't need to use all of them. Key ones would be images, whose voice or whose perspective is there given, does the article quote people from that cultural group that you're looking at, or is it just the general public's view? And then obviously things like when it was printed or created. And then the next thing you want to then think about is how you're going to categorize that data. So if you are doing quantitative content analysis, so you're doing a tally of these types of words, how are you going to organize that? Is it going to be in a table? Are you going to do like words? So anything that's associated with the word crime, or are you just going to look for the word crime or gang? Or if you're doing an interview, how are you going to categorize that information? Are you going to look at positive associations with that cultural group as they've migrated, negative associations? How is that going to work? If you need help with figuring out that, please let me know and I can help you with that. Your next step is to then analyze the data. So once you have collected, so I'm going to quickly go over, for an example, how to do this with qualitative, so how to use this table whilst looking at an article. So if you were to say, look at this article, first thing is that heading that you're seeing there, violent youth gangs terrorising Melbourne streets. And then if you look at the image that is projected behind it, it's at the forefront are African people of African identity. Even though you can see in the background there's a few more Caucasian youth there, at the forefront are Africans. And then also you have the police kind of spraying them. So not only are African migrants more at the forefront, but also they're connected with police. And that's an important part to pick up of the image, because it's kind of making that association or that connection between youth gangs per se and the police. So it's kind of presenting this idea to the public that African youth migrants are criminals. And then we see another one, and again there's an image of them being looking like they're in a fight, so they're being violent. Again, it's making that visual association between African youth and gangs or criminals and being violent. And then the next thing you can do is look at what the article is actually saying. So looking at all of these images that are provided to you, not one of these images are of Sudanese youth not in a gang, not in a group. All of the images there are showing Africans in groups, kind of again making that association between African youth and gangs, because they're in groups, and then they're represented as being violent, as well as the only other images you see are police. So visually making those connections between African youth being in groups and potentially being associated with crime because there are images of police. The next thing you can then do is look at, the types of words and what they're saying. They're behaving like street gangs, so let's call them that. That's what they are. So what we're seeing here are quotes from the police and general opinions of Africans. What we're not seeing are quotes from Sudanese people, Sudanese youth, and talking about what they think and how they're being associated with that. So the voice that is clearly lacking in here are Sudanese people or African youth, or even just African migrants. So looking through that article, you would then compare that to other articles, and you could use the table to do that. How many of the articles don't have African youth or Sudanese people being mentioned in that article? How many articles have, say, Sudanese youth looking violent or behaving violently or in groups or having police in the article, so making this association with crimes? Once you have collected that data, that's when you start to look for those comparisons. What trends are you seeing? What are the similarities? What are the differences? And then the key thing is you make those assumptions. What might this tell you? If all of the news articles are representing African youth as being violent and criminals, what might be the public's takeaway from that? How might that influence the general public's view of Africans if all they're seeing is them being criminals or violent? What might that do for African youth in Australia? Will they see the rest of the world thinking of them as that way if that's all they're seeing and how they're being represented? So you can make assumptions there. Sometimes it's good to have other articles like news or journal articles with explanations of how that representation might impact them, for example. Or say if you're doing a questionnaire or an interview, what are people typically saying about how they view Africans, for example, or your cultural group? What are they saying generally about what they think about those groups? And how might that be, why are they saying that? Or what might be the impacts for migrants as they come here if that's what they're thinking about those groups? Then the last thing is to place your findings in the report, and you want to make it specific. Don't just say the majority of people made this association from your interviews or your questionnaire. You want to use the data. So I'm going to go over kind of how you can structure this. So because this is a report, you can use headings and you can break it down. So for an example, I've got this broken down for you. This first part is just general overview. What is the potential issue that is impacting on your cultural group's migration to Australia. So this is probably more connected with, and I'll just get the assessment up so you know kind of how this might work. Let me get. So that heading that I've got there probably more connects with the consider current events that have impacted on your chosen group. So you can use that as a heading, or you can kind of change it. I've made it a little bit more specific to a specific issue for Sudanese people. So first thing is to make general statements. This you can get from just doing general research and making a summary of what is happening. Okay, so, and I've used a couple of examples there to be a little bit more specific to help give an overview of what people are thinking. So here I've mentioned that Sudanese people are being connected with gangs, and that there's questions over their suitability of being in Australia because they don't kind of fit in, the assumption is that they don't fit in with Australian way of life. Then you can go into your primary research. So you can see here that it's broken up, focusing on the point that's been made here about them feeling as though that they may be associated with gangs and that they're incompatible with Australian way of life. Then you first of all you want to start off with what the connection is, okay, what you're looking for, and then how it was done. So that they're looking for types of messages, that qualitative content analysis was used, and that what kind of newspaper articles were looked at, so the types of newspapers, so the Daily Telegraph and the ABC Online, and that there was 5 from that one and 5 from the Daily Telegraph. And then why? Why did you do it? So first of all, starting off with what you did, and then how you did it, and then why you did it might be a good way to structure it. And then you want to go into your findings. So you can see here that there are specific mentions of the findings, and that the types of images that they're using. So Daily Telegraph consistently used images of Black Africans either in groups out in public, sometimes located around damaged property, or police investigating damaged property. And then, there's a specific example there of the ABC. Once you have made statements of your findings, and that comes from the looking at the similarities and differences in the trends, then you want to make a statement of what this means, what this tells you, and how this might impact on African, and how the African youth or whatever cultural group you're looking at, and how this might impact on their migration, because that's what we're constantly coming back to. Why is migration to Australia complex? This point is looking at how media might make migration to Australia complex for certain groups. That's an example of how you might do content analysis. Another way you might be able to use this is doing, say, a questionnaire. So again, this starts off with what the connection is into the point you were just making, what the point was up here. And then how, so again, a statement of how it was conducted, so the types of questions that were asked, who was asked, the amount of questions that were asked, and so forth, and that the fact that there were 25 serious attempts, and this might happen, guys, you will share your questionnaire online, and you might get people that attempt it that are not serious, and that is okay. And then going in again, what are the specifics? How is that being used? And then I've not finished it off, but then again, you want to make that analysis. What does that tell you? Then you might finish off, I thought I had that there, but it's gone, overall conclusions. And this is where you just kind of connect your primary research with overall thoughts. So coming back to that question, why is migration complex in Australia? Okay, so I hope this helps you to understand how you might connect your primary research with your overall research on your cultural group. If you have any questions, I'm going to open up a discussion tab on our Canvas page so that you can ask those questions and I can help you there, or please feel free to email me as well through Canvas.